So, what's the African continent looking forward to from the G7 leaders meeting? Let's go live to Pretoria, where we have Professor Chris Isike joining us live via Zoom. He is a professor of African politics and development at the University of Pretoria in Africa. Professor, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Professor Isike, what are the stakes for the continent at this summit?
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. If you ask me, I would say vaccination, vaccination, vaccination. Africa should be supported by the G7 to produce vaccines for Africa, in the continent. It should not just be donations such as we've heard from the US president. There should be an agreement to allow Africa to produce vaccines that it needs if the idea of vaccinating the entire world is to materialize as the G7 expects.
All right, that brings me to my next question. The South African president has been invited to the meeting. Now, he speaks not only for South Africa, but also for the rest of the continent. Do you see this platform giving realistic hopes of solving the heavy burdens of vaccine shortage and unfair distribution?
Yes, absolutely. The G7 always presents an opportunity for discussion and decision on global collective action and cooperation. As President Ramaphosa of South Africa has been at the forefront of, advocating for, vaccine availability in the continent through the COVAX in Africa. He is well placed, given his last representation or the last leadership of the African Union in 2020, where he was very frontal in advocating for, dealing with the vaccine shortages and ensuring that we produce vaccines in Africa. South Africa is also leading in that regard. So he's well placed, he understands it, and he will not just speak for South Africa, he will be speaking for the whole of Africa. And I think that that is a very good opportunity for him to make the case to the G7.
All right. Professor Isike, before I let you go, how effective have follow-up mechanisms been after previous G7 meetings, especially on issues to do with Africa?
Well, Africa and the G7 have always partnered on issues that affect the continent, and there have been some successes. From the late 90s, G7 diplomats have worked through key issues, such as Cold War era deaths, communicable disease, and the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals there. And some other key successes they've had, from the past were around debt relief or debt reduction, around diseases like AIDS and malaria, transparency in the extractive sector. These are some of the examples, especially between the G7 of 2002 in Canada and through to the one in Japan in 2008, before we had the global economic crisis. There has been some successes, but there have also been, failures. The problem is usually around the lack of continuity in leadership in these countries, including in Africa. So we need to have committed leaders, both in Africa and the G7, to institutionalize some of these partnerships and then have clear monitoring and evaluation frameworks, as well as timelines to make them work. So I guess I'm saying that, there has been follow-up mechanisms on some issues, but where we have not institutionalized some of the decision-making around these issues in the continent, it has always faltered. So institutionalization, changing the way the world sees Africa, and giving Africa more capacity to be partners and equal partners at that, would help to ensure that there's follow-up on some of these issues that the G7 partners with Africa on.
All right, important statements that you've made there. Professor Isike speaking to us from Pretoria. We appreciate your perspective.